The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat.' He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you've not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. There was once a successful businessman who had managed to get all three of his children involved in his business. Now he was in the hospital dying as his family gathered around his bedside. He was rather weak and groggy as he looked up into his eldest son's eyes. "Ah, John, thank you for being here." And he gazed over at his daughter, saying, "Ah, Debbie, it's wonderful that you could come." And then he saw his youngest. "Ah, Jimmy, oh, you're all here." And at that point, he sat straight up in bed and said, "But if you're all here, who's minding the store?" In our four Gospels, the only topic that Jesus addresses more than our relationship to money is the reign or the kingdom of God. So how we relate to money, how we relate to our wealth is a spiritual issue. We need money to buy things necessary for our survival: food, shelter, clothing. It takes money to pay for travel that can expand our horizons. Having money allows us to buy a vast variety of things to make our lives more interesting and comfortable. So having a relationship with money is unavoidable. Even someone who takes a vow of poverty still has a relationship to money. So, is our relationship to money spiritually healthy or not? And how might the parable that Jesus tells today assist us in how we relate to our money and our wealth? Now, parables function like riddles. They contain surprises that defy conventional logic. They teach by getting us to see God, ourselves, and this world we inhabit in new and different ways. Biblical scholar Amy Jo Levine says that what makes parables mysterious or difficult is that they challenge us to look into the hidden aspects of our own values, our own lives. They bring to the surface unasked questions and reveal the answers we have always known but refuse to acknowledge. So our reaction to them should be one of resistance more than acceptance. If we hear a parable and think, well, I really like that, or worse, fail to take its challenge, we're not listening well enough. So how might we listen well to this parable today? In what ways does it challenge us? How might it change us? Perhaps we're not supposed to get Jesus' parables, but rather ponder them until they get us. I imagine most of us can relate to this manager who's been charged with not managing very well. He's kind of like the younger son in a previous parable, squandering away all that he's been given. How have we squandered things in our lives? How have we squandered the resources we have on this planet? How have we squandered opportunities and things that we've been put in charge of and given responsibility for? Many people throughout our world are anxious and worried about our changing climate. Young people especially challenge us to be better stewards and to make necessary changes to slow the effects of our climate crisis. I wonder if we might take some cues from this manager in this parable, who's been charged now with first wasting the master's resources. And then he changes. He changes what he does to provide for his future. And it's not just our future that's at stake now, but also the abundant life of future generations. Well, that's one entry point into this parable, among many ways it might address us. I think it also challenges us all to be more generous. For by reducing debts owed the master, this dishonest manager was actually being generous on his master's behalf, maybe even a little bit on his own. For his reductions line up with the kind of exorbitant interest charged in that day, sometimes as much as double for what was borrowed. And there was often a service charge for the manager tacked in as well. Perhaps that's one of the reasons that this dishonest manager gets commended, because he reveals his master's generosity. At the same time, this parable shines light on an unequal sharing of resources in the first place. Here is a gap between the rich and the poor, where some people are severely indebted to others. So in what ways does this parable critique current predatory economic practices, like payday lending or hiring cheap labor? But the real shock in this parable for me is when that manager who was told he's getting fired, in the end gets commended for his shrewdness. It never tells us, but I wonder if he ever even got fired after all. This parable blurs the line between right and wrong and proper punishment for those who squander what they have the responsibility to care for. Considering the surprising mercy for this manager, maybe I too can be a bit more gracious regarding my own foibles and the foibles of those around me. It highlights how in God's economy, people matter more than profits. People matter more than getting what one deserves. Could Jesus be inspiring his disciples to operate within God's economy of love and forgiveness instead of the world's means of retribution and profit margins? How might this parable be at work right now, changing us, reshaping how we relate to God, our wealth, and one another? There's a lot of evidence here in this text following the actual parable that Luke too wondered what Jesus was getting at here. For he pairs a whole string of different sayings with it. We heard some of them. Each one picks up on a different entry point into the actual parable, like being more shrewd or more faithful. The one that resonates most with me today is that you cannot serve God and wealth. Luke recognizes that this parable has something to say about the competing power that money has in our lives. Buying and selling are such a part of our everyday existence that we may not often recognize how money has power to enslave us. In reflection on this passage, scholar Melissa Sevier says, if all we care about is getting wealthier, our relationships grow less important. If we don't care about the customer, just the customer's money. We give up time with family and friends to focus on what we think is more important. If all we care about is getting wealthier, our bodies will suffer. We'll be more stressed, less healthy. We'll play less and sleep less and eat things that aren't good for us. Because time is money, and you don't get rich by taking walks and riding bikes or growing a garden and making a nice salad. If all we care about is getting wealthier, our spiritual lives shrivel. We find ourselves pulling away from our own spirits until the desire to be spiritual seems ridiculous. Remember, you cannot serve God and wealth. This parable can help us to break free from money's power over us and follow the manager's shrewdness of investing in relationships and in things like forgiveness, prayer, savoring joy, things that don't pay high monetary dividends. In God's economy, people are more important than profits. And Luke's many sayings here inspired me to generate another like saying, just to kind of lay alongside it. Whoever is generous in a very little is generous also in much, and whoever is stingy in a very little is stingy in much. Which reminds me of another story. I think it can serve as another parable for us. One afternoon, a shopper at a local mall felt the need for a coffee break. So she bought herself a little bag of cookies and then put them in her shopping bag, and then got in line for coffee, found a place to sit down at one of the crowded tables there, and then taking the lid off her coffee and taking out a magazine, she began to sip her coffee and read. And across the table from her, a man sat reading his newspaper. After a minute or two, she reached out and took a cookie. And as she did, the man seated across the table, well, he reached out and took one too. Well, this put her off, but she didn't say anything. A few moments later, she took another cookie. And once again, the man did too. Well, she was getting a bit perturbed, but she still didn't say anything. Well, after having a couple sips of coffee, she once again took another cookie, and so did the man. Well, she was really getting upset by this by now. And now there was only one cookie left. Well, apparently the man also realized that there was only one cookie left. And before she could say anything, he took it, broke it in half, offered half to her, and proceeded to eat the other half himself. Then he smiled at her, and putting the paper under his arm, he rose and walked off. She was livid. Her coffee break was ruined. Already thinking ahead how she could have told this rude offense of this man off, and she was going to go tell all of her family and friends how he had just treated her so rudely. So she folded her magazine, opened her shopping bag, and there she discovered her unopened bag of cookies. Well, I think that woman learned a lesson in generosity that day. It's a lesson best learned by practicing it. Michael Norton, a professor at the Harvard Business School, once gave a TED Talk in which he asserted that money can buy happiness. He says if you think that money can't buy happiness, then you're spending it wrong. And his research into the ways that it can be spent to buy happiness fall right in line with Jesus' parable. Money buys happiness when we're generous and we spend it on others. Money buys happiness when it's invested in building relationships. Whoever is generous in a very little is generous also in much. How we spend our money is a spiritual issue. So how might we be more spiritually shrewd or clever in this regard? In the second half of her poem, The Summer Day, one of my favorites, Mary Oliver writes this: I don't know exactly what prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? This, I believe, is the question to which our gospel drives us today. What will we do with our one wild and precious God-given life? Will we spend it well? Will we cultivate habits of generosity? Will we make friends with how we use our money? Will we serve God or wealth? How does Jesus' parable shock and change our relationship to our wealth and our money? How does God want us to manage this life and all the resources that we've been given? I hope that one day we'll be commended for our shrewdness. Amen.